Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Herman Pretorius. Herman, how are you doing?
Oscillating between existential dread and optimism.
Good stuff. And also Sara Gon. Sara, how are you doing?
Hi. No, we've had a lot of rain. Vegetable garden looks great. So
yeah, no,
we are bountiful.
A grey, cool, cloudy sky, and I must say I'm loving it.
There's a wonderful moment from, I can't remember what this, it's a satire puppet show from the UK where they had these, a puppet of Margaret Thatcher and a puppet of John Major, and a spitting image it might have been.
Spitting image.
And there's a wonderful moment where the cabinet goes for lunch or dinner, and the Margaret Thatcher puppet orders, I'll have the veal and I'll, and medium rare. And then the waiter goes, and the potatoes and the vegetables, Mom. Oh, they'll all have the same.
Very good.
Just as well I'm not a vegetarian.
All right. Let us go off into the news of today. And I think the most important story that's going on right now is the fight over control of the city of Ekurhuleni. So the very, very shaky, I'm not even going to call it a coalition because they didn't, a minority coalition, I guess, which was, it had put the DA in the mayorship seat of Ekurhuleni, fell apart last week with the EFF and the ANC voting together to throw them out. But now it looks as though the EFF, rather than simply allowing the ANC to take control of the municipality, appears to have made a play for the mayorship, and a serious one in collusion with some of the ANC. So the EFF put forward a mayoral candidate, Ekurhuleni Dunga, who was their candidate for the city of Ekurhuleni. However, apparently, despite a deal with the ANC, who was going to vote for their candidate, it didn't take place because of opposition within the ANC Ekurhuleni caucus, mostly driven by the ANC's previous, who was going to be their mayoral candidate, Zwandile Masina. So this is pretty interesting stuff because, one of the scenarios for 2024 is that the EFF and the ANC together form a coalition that is enough to hold a majority in parliament. But here we're seeing, I think, some reasons why that's not going to be as smooth sailing as some might think. Now, as we've made the point many times before, the EFF and the ANC are on a lot of the same ideological page. They agree on an awful lot more. They just sort of disagree who should be in charge of said program of national democratic revolution. But that point, while some might think is easily solvable, this suggests is not so solvable. One Ekurhuleni regional insider told the Sowetan, "We can't be held to ransom by the EFF. They want mayor or nothing." Can you imagine us working with the EFF? If they want to be in our government, they must be willing to come to us and compromise, not the other way around. And Masina, who after standing for mayor and then withdrawing, said that the ANC was going to put up a mayoral candidate, but this would be revealed in 7 days' time. However, this seems to be in contrast to the national leadership of the ANC, who seems to have worked out some sort of deal with the EFF. It's not entirely clear. A lot of this has been done behind closed doors. So, Herman, let me start with you. I think the way this could be a test case for what the country, if the EFF and ANC get together in 2024, might look like. And if it doesn't happen, if they aren't able to make out a deal here, maybe it suggests that they're not going to be able to make a deal at national level. What do you make of this?
I mean, that is it. To be honest, I don't know. It is. I usually have such strong ideas about how these things play out, but we genuinely are a bit into Wonderland here, where we are in a situation that we might start looking at Israel enviously in terms of their wonderfully stable democracy only for elections in 5 years, or was it 5 elections in 4 years? I can't remember, but
5 elections in 44 months.
In 4 years.
Wonderful. So the real, this throws a theory of mine out of the window unless the EFF is smarter than I think they are, which they might be, but I doubt it. And that is that I've long held the idea that the EFF simply don't want executive power. The closest up to this point that they've ever come to actually holding governmental power at a local, provincial, or national level was in some sort of obscure small municipality at the end of last year, where it took them 10 days to count 24 votes and realize that for the EFF mayor to have become mayor, the ANC must have voted for it. And then when they tallied up those 24 votes and they checked their calculations, and became clear that, the ANC must have voted for them, and they recalled that mayor from her position. And my idea is, my sort of theory has always been that the EFF really have the sweetest deal in politics. They have an ability to set an agenda to a very large extent, whether it's in the media, whether it's in the policy sphere. They have no shame, so they are brilliant at political stunts and gimmicks and setting the agenda, and they have the benefit of, the media who can't stop watching them, whether it's a horror film or a comedy. You keep your eyes glued on the screen. And for all that, they get paid handsome salaries to be, parliamentarians and legislatures with no real responsibility. And Julius Malema in 2014, I think it was 2014, said that, of course, we know expropriation without compensation will be economically damaging, but that is a price worth paying. So to my mind, the EFF emerged as this entity of opportunists that have significant power without any of the responsibilities, with all the advantages. And something that also played into my theory, as Ndlozi might say, theorem, not that he knows what it is, but anyway, let's go on, was the very rapid turnover of EFF MPs. It is not sustainable if you want to form a government for a new, every 3 months there being a new MP, because if there's every few months being a new spokesperson or a new deputy minister or a new minister, if an ANC and EFF were to join a coalition, that simply isn't workable. But this play will either prove me wrong, which it is likely to do, in the sense that, Nick, as you observed just before the show, that they've realized that there's only one way, one reliable route to patronage, and that is the executive power. I might be proven wrong. I might be proven right if this is sort of a double bluff. But now I'm just begging for opportunities not to look as stupid as my theory might make me. I don't think this is going to happen. But if it happens, if they fumbled, if they if they gambled this so strongly, knowing that they would make a power play and then retreat from the power play, just to remind the ANC that they are actually kingmaker in a way, that they never wanted the executive position, then I might be right. But this is, as political coalition developments go, this is the most interesting one in 5 years, because it is something that has never happened before, the EFF making a play for executive power.
So when I say that the EFF is a party of patronage, which I said just before we went on the show, some of this is based on, not just the kind of obvious, patronage, power, politics and stuff they play out in public. But when I was briefly in the Joburg Council as a DA councillor, I was put there to sit next to the EFF, presumably because I was expendable and can absorb the blows and bullets. But the chatting to the EFF councillors was always a very surreal experience, partly because they'd stand up, make a speech, which oftentimes it seemed like some of the more junior ones, they hadn't written the speech, they'd just been given it to read, denouncing whiteness and the white monopoly capital and all that. Then they'd sit down and be like, so do you have any more Biltong? But that's neither here nor there. They told me that they are always strapped for cash, some of these councillors, because apparently the EFF essentially treats them as a resource. So they are, according to some of those councillors I talked to, expected to pay from their own salaries for various EFF-related activities, such as buying soccer uniforms for people in the local community and handing out patronage in forms like that, which to the local community to win over votes, which is quite interesting. And that suggests to me that their need for patronage to keep the whole system working is extremely strong, because as I think a lot of us are, even some polling has shown, a lot of EFF people are not entirely on board with all of the ideological program. They're more just sort of there because they view it as an opposition party or as an opportunity for personal enrichment or something like that. But Sara, what do you make of all this? Recently, Lorimer said that that the EFF had been, quote, in training for too long and it was time for them to take government. And allegedly, they had tried to pressure the DA to give them leadership positions in some sort of grand coalition in places around the country, but that was rejected. And so now they've gone to the ANC. Do you think they're going to be able to work out something? What's your take on this whole mess?
To paraphrase Herman, I'm really not sure. And that's probably because of partly it's new. And I think, going to your point about patronage, it would be supported by the fact that if they couldn't get from the DA what they wanted, the next best thing was to go to the ANC. So they might get it, and for exactly the reasons that you suggest. I'm not sure if this is a harbinger of what may come out of the 2024 elections. Because it's the first time it's happened. It is in a municipality rather than a national election, and I think at national, the ambitions of the top, particularly Julius Malema, and to what extent the relationship going into a relationship with the ANC will yield him the benefits he wants, will come into play. And so I think there will, to some extent, be very different dynamics, particularly ego and personality dynamics at play in 2024. I mean, that's not to say this isn't a sort of chest thumping exercise of the most masculine toxicity ever. But I'm sure it is partly. I wonder if it isn't also because, if the EFF likes a sort of subterfuge of sort of guiding everything but not being responsible for anything. The one problem is that if anything good comes out of governance, their name's not on it. No one knows that the EFF was there amongst 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 other parties. It's the largest party who's holding the coalition underneath it that is seen as the party that produces the goods. And it's actually got to test itself. It's actually got to test itself without that, because the election figures are certainly at municipal level have been poor. I mean, really, really poor. I mean, in very low single digit type of figures, as Marius Groot would say. So I'm not sure that it does foretell anything. I also think that both parties, particularly the ANC, will be in a very different place in 2024, and what it may need and who may be the power brokers behind it will affect whether they go into a relationship with the EFF. I think the current parties in opposition are more likely to be, shall we say, solid.
So this is, I think this is really important to watch because, and I didn't clarify this, by the way, at the beginning, but because of this fight between the EFF and the ANC over who was going to be elected mayor, they postponed the council meeting. They called it off. So currently Ekurhuleni, as far as I understand, has no mayor, which is not great for the people of Ekurhuleni. But Herman, do you have final thoughts on this topic? I think that really this is the test case to see what the future of South Africa between 2024 and 2029 might look like.
Yeah, no, I must say that the best case scenario for South Africa in 2024 is the Tshwane situation, where you've got a Wild Dogs coalition that is stable enough so that there isn't the constant threat of government collapse. And the worst case is possibly Ekurhuleni, even worse than Joburg, because where essentially that it could come down to 3 paramedics arriving at a scene and each trying to claim who gets the victim's watch. So it is a difficult situation, but something that we should keep in mind is that the EFF isn't in a great position nationally. Its support in elections have either plateaued or gone down. It's on the wrong side of the immigration question that has really started in informal settlements politics, really energized.
By wrong side, you mean unpopular side?
Yes. On the unpopular side, in the sense that they are Pan-Africanists and they are seen as Pan-Africanists. So they don't have credibility on this issue. They don't have credibility on other issues, but this one has, as I think, cut particularly deep into its base. And then also, COVID 2020, 2021, and 2022 have not been kind to the EFF. A party whose media attention is really based on the ability to pull stunts, have had that ability lessened by COVID, but also, ironically, by the burning down of Parliament. Parliament is no longer the show theatre where you can confront the president. The introduction of sort of the idea that the president can hasten back from America to chair an online cabinet meeting has now taken hold to such a degree that there is no longer the drama of confronting even the president mano a mano in the parliamentary chamber, where journalists can get good footage of the president sitting there. In Afrikaans, we say met the back vol tande. So the EFF isn't in a strong position. They need a desperate ploy. They need something to change the arithmetic, and a play for the executive might be motivated through that. It might be a desperate scramble for relevance and patronage. And I think somewhere those two factors would, if there's an explanation for this that a coherent mind can understand, is probably going to emerge from those points.
Interesting stuff. Anyway, we'll keep an eye on it and update everyone as developments happen. But let's move on to our next story. And on Monday, we had the good news that one of the board members of Eskom, Mr. Mteto Nyati, had criticized, not in 100% direct terms, but pretty clearly that BEE was causing problems for Eskom and that it needed to be scrapped if Eskom was to be saved. One of the things he was quoted as saying in the Sunday Times is internal corruption is largely at the back of empowerment policies that promote small businesses. These policies need to be reviewed or changed where appropriate. He also said something about we need people with the right skills, regardless of who they are. Well, as expected, this caused a flurry of panic in certain quarters, in the sort of race nationalist quarters, that someone was undermining the message from the inside, and it wasn't long until the board as a whole of Eskom reiterated that it is entirely behind the government's race law programs, and in fact that Mr. Nyati's comments were misrepresented. Those, according to the Eskom board chairperson, those who have been following public media reports would have followed an article on Sunday where Mr. Nyati was, in our view, misrepresented in terms of what was reported to have been said about the broad-based BEE and transformation. And then in the statement, they reiterated that they embraced preferential procurement, Policy Framework Act, and all government policies aimed at transforming the economy. Sara? Not unexpected, but it doesn't seem as though he himself has pulled back these things. It's more being done on his behalf. What do you make of this?
It is, I think, one of two things, and possibly both. Both things are relevant. The first is that the board, our new board, the board that came in on white horses to rescue us from complete collapse of the energy grid, is a bunch of wusses. Because if a board would ever be in a stronger position to say these things and support their member, now would be it. I mean, it doesn't matter who the government is or what it says or what it does. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that Pravin Gordhan, who we know is an ideologue of some persistence. He followed. I don't think he's no longer a member of the Communist Party, but he's definitely old school communist. And he's known to be irascible, and he probably got onto the phone on Sunday afternoon to the chairman of the board and said, roll this back. I think it's one's speculating a bit, but either way, it does not bode well for us that the board either didn't tell him to go and get stuffed, or we're prepared to say this and prepared to, because we're in a situation with Eskom that if you need the devil himself to sit at the board in order to get Eskom repaired, that's who you get to sit on the board. So it's let's put it this way. The remarks by Ngati were great, and we all got excited, but with sure in the knowledge that it wouldn't last, and sure in the knowledge it didn't last.
So, Herman, in a related story, the giant power station, one of South Africa's newest power stations, which is still coming on, the Kusile Power Station, who only has 4 of their 6 units online so far, because the other 2 are still, I believe, under construction, has had a catastrophic failure on one of its chimneys, and appears to have exploded. So just to remind you, this is one of our new power plants, despite the fact that Eskom has for a long time been talking about how the problems with our electricity system are caused by our aging fleet, and this causes our breakdowns. So there's some pictures of it online. You can go check it out. It's pretty hectic stuff. No foul play is suspected, according to Eskom. Herman, I cannot think of a better sort of illustration of the problem that needs to be fixed, whilst the board of Eskom continues to double down on the no, yes, we do exactly what government says, we're all on board, every single piece of unhelpful, stupid policy and legislation that keeps us in the same place we are.
Yeah, I think it was James Myburg who made the brilliant observation that we've aired on this show before, is that the ANC's been more successful in damaging Eskom infrastructure from a position of government than when its official policy was to blow up power stations as part of the struggle. When I saw that image of that blown up chimney, I was just like, oh my goodness, Mandela and co. Tambo, eat your heart out. Your successors have managed something that you never did, and that was to fundamentally cripple the South African energy supply and grid. So, tick. But on a broader point, Stalin shot the scientists, and there's something very valuable in the sense that a scientist was willing to say something which 5-10 years ago would have gotten him shot. The fact that he is now muzzled and possibly imprisoned, but not shot, is minor progress. Paradigms crumble, and then they collapse. The idea that a newly appointed Eskom board member could say something like this, it is a sign of something changing. It's not a sign of change any more formidable than continental drift, but the fact that this could be said by a newly appointed Eskom board member illustrates the extent to which the ANC can't deny reality forever. It was a demand for skills that actually brought an end to the National Party. It was a demand for skills that brought about the first trickles of labor reform in the mid-70s, the unbanning of black trade unions, that eventually would lead to the full-on collapse. And that started with discordant notes coming from irresponsible members of the choir. The fact that we could hear such a note that doesn't gel with the harmony that Pravin Gordhan would want them singing, it's not massive, but it's not nothing. And it reminds me, Frans Cronje, our erstwhile, beloved leader, always made the point that apartheid, Jaap Maree, a very conservative right-wing parliamentarian, warned the government that were they to allow a New Zealand rugby team with a Maori team player to play against the Springboks, one day, and I think the quote went something like, a black parliamentarian would sit next to you and a black man will marry your daughter. Now that sounds ridiculous, but it was true. The moment you compromise on a principle, on a firmly held ideological basis, the moment those cracks start appearing, you become vulnerable. And it's the job of ordinary South Africans and people like us to see those cracks appearing and then to understand them for what they are. Hairline cracks that could become bigger, that could become actually the crumbling of the current paradigm. So I wouldn't say, yay, wonderful, Nyati said something sensible. But the fact that he said something sensible, the fact that the consequences have been muted in a way, the fact that he hasn't been paraded like a North Korean to recant of his heresy, and the fact that crack after crack after crack is beginning to appear in the fundamental NDR, and the demand for skills is becoming something truly non-racial and core to keeping whatever is left of our economy alive. I think those aren't bereft of some seeds of hope for progress.
Take heart, ye non-racialists, for the change is coming. All right. Okay, let's move overseas for our final story. And this is just kind of interesting, I think, to think about. North Korea has been firing missiles over Japan over the last couple of months. On Thursday, so I think it was what would have been early our morning, a missile was fired. It looked like it was going over Japan, but it crashed into the sea before it passed over. So the Japanese government issued a warning to its citizens to seek shelter, just in case something happened, but cancelled the warning after the missile crashed. Officials in both South Korea and Japan have confirmed that they believe that this missile may have been an intercontinental ballistic missile, which is the type of missile that is used usually to deliver a nuclear warhead over extremely long ranges. So presumably an intercontinental ballistic missile would be able to reach, in this case, most importantly, the west coast of the United States. Now, so far, there's no evidence that any of North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missiles have actually achieved what they set out to do. There have been a number of missiles that have crashed into the sea recently. But this just shows that North Korea, despite all of the sanctions against it, despite the constant pressure it's under, despite the ruinous state of its economy, is continuing to progress with its nuclear weapons program. And that I would not be surprised if within the next 5 years, North Korea has a intercontinental ballistic missile capable of delivering a nuclear warhead pretty much anywhere in the world. So that's interesting to think about. On top of that, Iran, which is under huge pressure right now from major internal protests, also under sanctions from the US, is very likely going to be able to develop a nuclear weapon within the next couple of years. So I think we do need to think about the prospect that the future we're moving into is a world of massive nuclear proliferation, where every sort of even medium power state has access to nuclear weapons. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia, with the help of Pakistan, might begin developing their own nuclear weapon. Egypt might try. I know they're currently building nuclear power plants with peaceful nuclear power plants with, I think, the help of both Russia and South Korea. But Herman, let me start with you. Any thoughts on this problem of massive nuclear proliferation?
Well, a local point and then an international point. We are more likely to get a nuclear weapon system online than Medupi. So, yay for us. The other question is, of course, that there was never really any chance for the sustainable, unilateral disarmament nonsense that the Fukuyama end of history, end of the 20th century take really ensconced. The real worry is that the West no longer, the West, if I could call it that, countries that buy into, liberal democracy, the nation state, the bare essentials of Western civilization, if we could call it that. The real concern we have is that many of these countries have turned out to be wimps. When the Taliban took over, they found US Army intersectional guides left over, and I'm sure they were useful in some way.
On the point of North Korea specifically, I believe that the I think it was the Clinton administration, or maybe it was the first Bush administration, did sign a deal with them in the 1990s saying, okay, here's some aid, don't develop a nuclear weapon. And as it turned out, that didn't work.
Yes, it started under Bush 1, but then sort of Clinton had that famous photograph where he sits with, very happy North Koreans. They weren't happy. But the point is, it is disconcerting that we are again facing a situation of increased tension, increased armament. And the best thing we could hope for is that countries, whether they're in Africa, South America, India, whatever it might be worth, Australasia, Europe, America, wherever they are, let's not call it the West, but wherever these countries are, and there's this idea that authoritarianism is suboptimal, that these countries skrikken wakker and just realize that the greatest threat to humanity is not the patriarchy, but it is actual war and death and destruction and massive, massive suffering.
Sara, very briefly, your thoughts on this topic.
Two things. One is that its only real political and economic ally is China, which is a big one. And given the sort of caution that China's playing with Russia over Russia and Ukraine, I think if North Korea gets out of line too much, they will sort of yank back the chain, shall I say, put it that way. The other thing, it's a bit like a child sort of constantly going at a dog and annoying it until eventually it lands its missile sort of on a beach in California and America strikes back. They can't begin to imagine what would happen if that actually happened. And China, I think, would be extremely, extremely pissed off. I think the effect would probably be they wouldn't need to go nuclear back. They would just be completely, North Korea would do very badly being faced with conventional weaponry. So I think North Korea is really just careless, and partly it's careless because it's, for all the reasons we know, it just doesn't have the wherewithal because the rest of the society is in such an appalling state to make sure that it has proper aim.
I think part of their strategy here is what has been described by, I can't remember who, as the crazy wounded cripple gambit, where you just look really crazy and you threaten everyone with your nuclear weapons and your tools, and then you get them to give you aid or money or latitude to do whatever you want. And I can very much see that their leverage will only increase once they get a nuclear weapon that they can use for blackmail.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think they've played that game. Anyway.
You think that everyone would be wise to it by now, but anyway. Okay, we are well over time now, so I must close. But thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and we will be back tomorrow on the day.